The village of Umidum pulsed with life on the day Adiz was born. The rhythmic beat of drums echoed through the air as women sang songs of joy and praise. Children ran barefoot through the dusty paths, their laughter ringing like bells, while elders gathered beneath the ancient Irako tree, nodding in approval. A new life had entered the world, and in this village, the birth of a child was always a cause for celebration. Inside a small clay hut, Nena cradled her newborn daughter in weak arms, her skin glistening with sweat. She was exhausted, but the sight of Adiz's tiny fingers grasping at the air filled her with unspeakable joy. The baby's cries were strong, her dark eyes wide and curious. To Nena, she was perfect, a gift from the gods. Obinna, a tall and respected hunter, knelt beside his wife, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "You are strong, my love," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And she is as beautiful as you." Nena smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the soft curve of Adiz's cheek. But even as happiness swelled in her heart, a deep fatigue pulled at her body. The birth had drained her, leaving her weaker than she had ever been. Outside, the mood was festive, but not all shared in the joy. In a corner of the compound, Obinna's mother, Mama Ajima, sat with a disapproving frown. Though she was proud to have a granddaughter, her worry for her son's future overshadowed her happiness. "She is too weak," Mama Ajima murmured to Amadi, her brother, who sat beside her. "A woman who cannot recover after childbirth is a woman who will not last." Amadi sighed. "Give her time, sister. The gods may yet restore her strength." Mama Ajima shook her head. "Obinna is my only son. If Nena does not survive, who will care for him? He must take another wife before it is too late." It was not that Mama Ajima hated Nena, she had once welcomed her with open arms. But in their culture, a strong wife was the pillar of a man's household. If Nena remained fragile, who would raise Adiz? Who would ensure that Obinna's lineage continued? Days turned into weeks, and though Nena's condition improved slightly, she remained weak, unable to perform her usual duties. Mama Ajima saw this as a sign. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the land, she pulled Obinna aside. "My son," she began softly, her voice laced with concern, "you must think of your future. A man cannot have just one wife, especially when she is frail. The gods do not look kindly on a house without a strong woman." Obinna's jaw tightened. "Nena is still here, mother. She will recover." Mama Ajima sighed. "And if she does not?" Obinna did not answer. In his heart, he refused to consider such a fate. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Outside the hut, under the watchful eyes of the moon, Adiz let out a small, innocent cry. She had no idea that the battle for her family's future had already begun. The village of Umidum was still waking when the news spread like wildfire: Obinna had taken a second wife. Women whispered behind cupped hands, their voices a mixture of curiosity and concern. Some sympathized with Nena, knowing how painful it must be to share her husband. Others nodded in agreement with Mama Ajima's decision. A strong household needed a strong woman, and Nena had been too weak for too long. Amara arrived in Obinna's compound just after the first rains of the season, her presence as striking as the thunderclouds that had rolled across the sky the night before. She was beautiful, tall, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Her laughter was rich, and her voice carried like music. But beneath the charm and grace, something darker lurked. The moment Amara stepped into the compound, she studied it as though she were a queen assessing her new kingdom. She noted the size of the hut, the placement of the cooking pots, the way the servants moved quickly around Mama Ajima. But most of all, she noticed Nena. At first glance, Nena was everything Amara was not: soft-spoken, gentle, still recovering from her illness. But despite her frailty, there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, in the way she clutched Adiz close to her chest, as if protecting her from unseen dangers. "Welcome, my sister," Nena said, offering a warm smile despite the pain in her heart. Amara smiled back, but it did not reach her eyes. "Thank you, senior wife," she said sweetly, but the title dripped with insincerity. Obinna, ever the dutiful husband, had expected some tension, but he believed love and time would smooth things over. He did not see the flicker of jealousy in Amara's gaze when he kissed Adi's forehead. He did not notice the way she clenched her fists whenever he spoke fondly of Nena. To him, Amara was simply adjusting to her new life. But Amara was not adjusting, she was plotting. Within weeks, she had ingratiated herself with Mama Ejima, feeding the older woman's resentment toward Nena. "She is still weak," Amara would murmur at night as she massaged Mama Ejima's feet. "A man like Obinna needs a wife who can bear him many children, not just one frail daughter." Mama Ejima would nod in agreement. "You are right, my child. A strong woman must protect her husband's legacy." Slowly, Amara took control of the household. She was the one who now instructed the servants, who oversaw the meals, who determined what was needed in the market. If Nena noticed her slipping power, she said nothing. She simply focused on Adiz, shielding her from the shifting tides. But Amara was not content with just ruling the household, she wanted Nena and Adiz gone. At first, it was small things. A bowl of soup left slightly too long over the fire so it burned before reaching Nena's hands. A missing blanket on a particularly cold night. A whispered comment to Obinna about how Adiz seemed too weak for a child her age, planting seeds of doubt in his mind. Nena, though aware of the changes, refused to complain. She believed in patience, in kindness, in the power of love to overcome hatred. But patience could not stop the inevitable. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Amara stood outside the hut, watching as Obinna played with Adiz. The little girl giggled as her father lifted her high into the air, her tiny hands grasping at the sky. Amara's lips curled into a tight smile, but inside, her heart burned with resentment. That child should not be the firstborn. That child should not stand in the way of my own children. The thought wrapped itself around her mind like a snake, tightening with each passing day. She had won control of the household, but it was not enough. To secure her place, to ensure her own future children would inherit everything, she had to remove the obstacles in her path. Nena and Adiz. And so, as the village settled into the rhythm of the coming harvest, Amara's true nature began to unfold. She was patient, calculating, and above all, determined. Obinna was still blind to the growing storm in his home, but soon, he would be forced to see. Very soon. The moon hung high over the village of Umadim, its silver light casting eerie shadows over the compound. The crickets sang their usual night song, blending with the distant hoot of an owl. But within the walls of Obinna's home, a far more sinister tune was being composed. Amara sat beside Mama Ejima, their faces barely illuminated by the flickering flame of an oil lamp. A heavy silence filled the space between them, thick with unspoken words. Amara had long since grown tired of waiting. It was time to act. "Mother," Amara said softly, her voice smooth as silk yet laced with venom, "you know as well as I do that Nena's child is a problem." Mama Ejima's lips pursed as she stared into the flame, lost in thought. She had always held on to the belief that her son, Obinna, deserved better than Nena, a stronger wife, one who could bear him many sons. And now, Adiz, a mere girl, was being groomed as the firstborn heir. It was unacceptable. "Adiz is just a child," Mama Ejima murmured, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her hesitation. Amara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming like a serpent preparing to strike. "She is Nena's child," she corrected. "The longer she stays, the deeper her roots grow in this family. Do you think Obinna will ever see my sons as equals when his firstborn, his precious daughter, is in the way?" Mama Ejima sighed heavily. She did not hate Adiz, but the truth was undeniable. If the girl remained, she would inherit everything. And Nena, despite her frail nature, still held a quiet power over Obinna's heart. "We must act now," Amara pressed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Before she becomes old enough to cement her place." Mama Ejima finally turned to Amara, her eyes dark with unspoken agreement. "What are you suggesting?" A slow, cruel smile spread across Amara's lips. "We take her away. far enough that she will never return. Mama Ajima stiffened. You mean, kill her? Amara sked, shaking her head. No, mother. That would be too risky. If she is found dead, Obinna will never forgive us. But if she disappears? He will grieve, yes, but he will move on. He will have more children, my children. And with time, he will come to see that it was the will of the gods. Mama Ajima looked away, her hands trembling slightly. This was a line she had never thought she would cross. But the vision of her son's lineage being controlled by Nena's child was unbearable. How? She asked finally. Amara's smile widened. We wait for the night of the festival, when the village will be busy celebrating. No one will notice if a child goes missing in the commotion. We take her deep into the forest and leave her there. The wild will do the rest. A chill ran through Mama Ajima, but she nodded. The plan was set. The festival of the harvest arrived swiftly, bringing with it an air of celebration. The villagers adorned themselves in colorful garments, drumming and dancing beneath the full moon. Laughter echoed through the night, mingling with the sweet aroma of roasted yams and spicy soup. No one noticed the two shadowy figures slipping away from the compound. Wrapped tightly in a woven cloth, little Adiz stirred in her sleep, her tiny fingers twitching as she dreamed. Amara held her close, not with the tenderness of a mother, but with the firm grip of someone holding onto a burden. Beside her, Mama Ajima walked in silence, her heart hammering in her chest. The path to the forest was dark, the towering trees whispering secrets to the wind. Owls hooted from their perches, and somewhere in the distance, a hyena howled. When they reached the riverbank, Amara stopped. The air smelled damp, heavy with the scent of moss and wet earth. This was far enough. Mama Ajima hesitated. Are you sure about this? Amara did not answer. Instead, she knelt and placed the baby on a patch of grass near the river's edge. Adiz stirred, her tiny lips parting as she let out a small, innocent coo. Mama Ajima clenched her fists. The baby was helpless, unaware of the cruel fate being decided for her. Let's go, Amara said, her voice devoid of emotion. But just as they turned to leave, a sharp rustling in the bushes made them freeze. Mama Ajima's breath hitched. Did you hear that? Amara narrowed her eyes, scanning the darkness. The wind rustled the leaves again, but this time, it was different. It was deliberate. Someone was watching. A deep unease settled over them, prickling their skin like cold water. Amara grabbed Mama Ajima's wrist. We must leave now. They hurried away, not daring to look back. Behind them, the night stretched on, wrapping its secrets in the shadows of the trees. Unseen to them, a pair of watchful eyes glowed from the darkness, observing everything. And in the stillness of the night, a soft voice murmured, "The gods have seen." The village of Umadam was alive with celebration. The air was thick with the scent of roasted yams, palm wine, and burning firewood. The festival of the harvest was the most anticipated event of the year, and tonight, no one was spared from its joyous grip. Children ran between dancers, their laughter blending with the pounding drums, while elders exchanged stories over shared meals. But beyond the village square, where the shadows stretched long beneath the moonlight, a much darker event was unfolding. Inside Obinna's compound, Amara moved with practiced ease, her heart hammering in her chest. Adiz lay in her woven cradle, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of sleep. The infant had no idea that tonight, her fate was about to be rewritten. Amara glanced over her shoulder. Mama Ajima stood by the doorway, her hands twisting in the folds of her wrapper. Though she had agreed to the plan, doubt flickered in her eyes. Do not hesitate, Amara hissed under her breath. This must be done. Mama Ajima swallowed hard, her gaze drifting toward Adiz. The baby let out a soft sigh, stretching her tiny fingers. For a brief moment, guilt gnawed at the old woman's heart. She had been the one to welcome this child into the world, to whisper blessings over her on the night of her birth. But Amara's words echoed in her mind, she is Nena's child. She will take everything. Taking a deep breath, Mama Ajima stepped forward. "Let us go." Amara wasted no time. She scooped Adiz into her arms, pressing the baby close to her chest. Wrapped in a thick cloth to muffle any cries, the infant barely stirred. With practiced stealth, they slipped out of the compound, moving like shadows against the night. The distant drums from the festival masked the sound of their footsteps, and within moments, they disappeared into the darkness of the forest. The journey was long, and the forest was alive with sounds of the night. Insects buzzed, unseen creatures rustled in the underbrush, and an owl let out a haunting call. Amara led the way, her grip on Adiz firm, while Mama Ajima trailed behind, her heart heavy. Finally, they reached their destination, a secluded spot by the riverbank, where the trees grew thick and wild. The river's waters shimmered under the moonlight, its soft gurgling filling the silence between them. "This is far enough," Amara said, kneeling to place Adiz on a patch of soft grass. Mama Ajima hesitated. The baby stirred slightly, her lips parting as if sensing the loss of warmth. "She is just a child," the old woman murmured, doubt creeping into her voice. "The forest is dangerous." "The river." Amara's eyes flashed. "That is the point." Mama Ajima looked away, shame burning her throat. She had told herself that they were not truly killing Adiz, that fate would decide whether the child survived. But standing here now, watching the helpless baby in the moonlight, she felt no different from a murderer. "She will not remember any of this," Amara said, her voice eerily calm. "By tomorrow, the forest will have swallowed her whole." Mama Ajima shuddered. She wanted to turn back, to grab the baby and rush home, but her feet remained planted. Fear bound her, fear of Amara, fear of what would happen if Nena's child grew up to claim everything. Amara straightened, dusting off her hands. "It is done. Let's go." Without another glance at the child, she turned and began walking away. Mama Ajima lingered a moment longer. Adiz let out a small, sleepy whimper. The sound was so soft, so fragile, that it nearly broke the old woman's resolve. But she closed her eyes, steeled herself, and followed Amara into the darkness. They thought they were alone. They were wrong. Unseen among the trees, a pair of eyes glowed in the shadows. The figure had been there all along, watching, listening. They had followed the women from the village, their steps as silent as the wind. Now, they moved forward. The figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing a tall man wrapped in a hunter's cloak. His face remained hidden beneath the hood, but his eyes, sharp, piercing, never left the small bundle on the ground. A moment of silence passed before he stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. The baby stirred again, sensing the presence near her. The man knelt. Carefully, he lifted Adiz into his arms. She was light, no more than a few months old, yet warmth radiated from her tiny body. She did not cry, did not flinch. Instead, her little fingers curled around a piece of his cloak, gripping it tightly. For a long moment, the man simply stared at her. His heart, hardened by years of solitude, softened in a way he had never known before. "The gods have seen," he murmured, his voice deep, rough like the earth. Rising to his feet, he cradled the baby against his chest. Then, without a sound, he disappeared into the forest, carrying Adiz with him. The night swallowed them whole, but one thing was certain, this was not the end of Adiz's story. It was only the beginning. The first golden rays of morning light spilled over the village of Umadim, chasing away the last remnants of the night. Birds chirped atop the thatched roofs, signaling the start of another day. But in Obina's household, the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. Nena stirred awake, her body still weak from childbirth, but an uneasy feeling gripped her chest before she could even sit up. Something felt wrong. The room was too quiet. Her heart pounded as she turned to Adiz's woven cradle. Empty. For a moment, Nena froze, her mind struggling to process the sight before her. She blinked rapidly, willing herself to wake up from what had to be a nightmare. But the cradle remained empty. The little blanket Adiz had been wrapped in was folded neatly at the corner, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. A piercing scream tore through the morning air. Deep in the heart of the forest, far from the chaos of the village, an old woman sat outside a small mud hut, grinding a bundle of herbs between her calloused fingers. Her face was lined with age, her dark skin weathered by time and wisdom. She was known as Mama Afika, the healer, the strange one, the woman whom the villagers feared yet secretly sought when misfortune befell them. Mama Afika knew the whispers that followed her name. They called her a witch, a spirit woman who spoke to the unseen. But she did not mind. She had long since learned that people feared what they did not understand. As she ground the herbs, her sharp ears picked up an unusual sound. The faint whimpering of a child. She stilled. Her hands tightened around the mortar as she listened again. The sound was weak but unmistakable. A baby. Rising to her feet, she moved with surprising agility for her age, following the soft cries into the thick foliage. Her bare feet made no sound against the damp earth as she stepped through the dense undergrowth. And then, she saw her. A small bundle lay nestled against the roots of a great iroko tree. The baby's eyes fluttered open, dark and curious, as if sensing the presence of the old woman. She did not cry out in fear. Mama Afika knelt beside the child, her wise eyes scanning her tiny face. Recognition flickered in her gaze. She had seen this child before, at her birth, when she had been summoned to bless her. Adis. A slow breath left Mama Afika's lips as understanding settled over her like a heavy cloth. She was no fool. She knew the ways of jealous women and scheming elders. She had seen how Amara's eyes darkened whenever she looked at Nena's child. She had heard the way Mama Ajima spoke of lineage, of inheritance, of what should and should not belong to a girl. And now, here was proof of their wickedness. Mama Afika reached down, gently lifting Adis into her arms. The child was cold, her tiny fingers curled into fists. But she was alive. The gods had not abandoned her. The old woman exhaled sharply. Foolish women, she muttered under her breath. You think you can defy the will of the spirits? She adjusted the baby in her arms, her resolve hardening. They had left this child to die, believing the forest would claim her. But fate had other plans. Turning away from the iroko tree, Mama Afika carried Adis back to her hut, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Back in the village, chaos reigned. Nena's wails echoed through the compound as she collapsed to the ground, her body racked with sobs. Servants rushed in, startled by the commotion. Obinna, still groggy from a night of celebration, stormed into the room, his face dark with worry. What is happening? He demanded. Nena lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice shaking. She's gone, Obinna. Adis is gone. His heart lurched. Gone? What do you mean gone? I woke up, and she wasn't in her cradle. Nena's voice broke. Someone took her. A heavy silence fell over the room. Obinna's face twisted with confusion, then rage. Who would do such a thing? The servants exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting toward Mama Ajima and Amara, who stood nearby. Amara clutched the edge of her wrapper, her expression a mask of well-practiced shock. This is terrible. Amara gasped, shaking her head. Who could steal a child from her mother? Mama Ajima remained silent, but her hands trembled ever so slightly. Obinna turned to the gathered crowd. Search the village. Find my daughter. His voice was thunderous, his desperation evident. The villagers spread out, combing through every hut, every pathway, every shadowed corner. But there was no trace of Adis. And as Nena lay on the ground, her grief consuming her, Amara stole a glance at Mama Ajima. They had done what needed to be done. Or so they thought. In the quiet of the forest, Mama Afika sat beside her fire, cradling Adis in her arms. The baby had fallen into a peaceful sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The old woman watched her for a long time, her mind weaving through the threads of fate. She had lived many years, had seen many things. But she knew this child was different. She would not let harm come to Adis. the spirits had spoken. And soon, the wicked would pay. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues over the thick forest canopy. Birds flitted between trees, calling out in melodic songs, while the rustling leaves whispered secrets of time long past. Deep in the heart of the forest, where few dared to venture, a small hut stood hidden among towering trees. Smoke curled from its thatched roof, the scent of herbs and burning wood filling the air. Inside, a young girl sat beside a wooden mortar, pounding dried leaves into fine dust. Her hands worked skillfully, moving with the precision of someone trained in the art of healing. She had grown into a striking child, her dark skin glowed in the firelight, and her intelligent eyes held a depth beyond her years. "Adis," Mama Afika called from across the hut. The girl looked up, setting her work aside. "Yes, Mama." The old healer studied her for a long moment before nodding. "It is time." Adis frowned. "Time for what?" Mama Afika didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to a bundle of dried leaves hanging from the rafters, pulling down a small, intricately woven pouch. She held it in her hands, feeling the weight of the years it carried. "For too long, the truth has been hidden," she murmured. "And for too long, the wicked have gone unpunished." Adis' brow furrowed. She had grown up knowing she was different. Mama Afika had told her stories of the village, of people who lived beyond the forest, but she had never once been allowed to leave. She had asked, time and time again, where she had come from, but the healer had always responded with the same words: "When the time is right, you will know." And now, the time had come. Mama Afika turned to Adis, her gaze firm. "You are not just a child of the forest, Adis. You were born in Umidim." Adis' breath caught. "The village?" "Yes." The old woman walked to the fire and placed the pouch into the flames. It burned slowly, releasing a thick, fragrant smoke that spiraled toward the ceiling. It was a message, a sign only the elders of Umidim would understand. "They will come," Mama Afika said, her voice low. "And when they do, you will finally learn the truth." In Umidim, Nena was preparing for the evening meal when a strange scent drifted through the air. She paused, her fingers tightening around the calabash she held. The aroma was familiar, stirring memories she had long tried to bury. Her heart pounded. She turned to Obina, who sat sharpening a blade outside their hut. "Do you smell that?" she asked. He lifted his head, sniffing the air. His expression changed instantly, his hand stilling on the blade. Without another word, Nena rushed toward the village square. A small group had already gathered, whispering among themselves. The elders stood at the center, their faces grim. "It is a message," one of them said. Obin arrived moments later, his face dark with unspoken emotions. He turned to the elders, his voice hoarse. "Who sends it?" An old man stepped forward, his gaze distant. "Mama Afika." A hush fell over the crowd. Nena's hands trembled. "Mama Afika," she whispered. The name sent a shiver down her spine. She had not seen the old healer in years, not since the night her daughter had disappeared. Her knees weakened, and Obina was at her side instantly, steadying her. "What does the message mean?" he demanded. The elder hesitated before answering, his voice heavy. "A child thought to be dead, is alive." The words struck like lightning. Nena gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. The world spun around her, memories flooding back, Adis' tiny fingers clutching hers, her soft coos in the night, the emptiness of the cradle that fateful morning. Obina's face turned pale. "It cannot be." Tears welled in Nena's eyes. "My baby." Without waiting for permission, she turned and ran, her feet kicking up dust as she made for the forest. Obina followed without hesitation. The villagers watched them disappear into the trees, whispers trailing behind them like echoes of the past. The journey through the forest was grueling. Branches clawed at their clothes, roots threatened to trip them, but neither Nena nor Obina slowed. Their hearts pounded in their chests, their breaths ragged with desperation. And then, through the trees, they saw it, the small hut, standing in the clearing like a forgotten relic of time. Nena stumbled forward, barely able to contain herself. "Adis," she cried out. From inside the hut, the girl heard the voice, unfamiliar yet strangely warm. Her chest tightened as she turned to Mama Afika, uncertainty in her eyes. Mama Afika nodded once. Slowly, Adis stepped out of the hut. The moment Nena laid eyes on her, she fell to her knees. Obinna stood frozen, his throat working as he tried to speak. The girl before them was not the infant they had lost. She was older, taller, her features sharper. But there was no mistaking it, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her lips, she was their daughter. Tears spilled down Nena's face. "Adis." Adis stared at the weeping woman, then at the man beside her. Mama Afika placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is your mother," she murmured. "And your father." Adis' heart pounded. She had imagined this moment so many times, yet now that it was here, she did not know what to say. Slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward. Nena reached out, hands trembling, afraid that if she touched her, the girl would disappear like a wisp of smoke. But when her fingers met Adis' skin, warmth blossomed between them. A sob racked Nena's body as she pulled Adis into her arms. "My child," she whispered brokenly. "My baby. I thought I lost you forever." Obinna knelt beside them, his strong arms wrapping around them both. "Adis," his voice broke. "Forgive us." Adis closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of her parents for the first time. She did not need to ask what had happened. She already knew. And somewhere, deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Because if her parents had suffered for all these years, then those who had stolen her would have to face the truth. And this time, justice would not be denied. The sun hung high in the sky as Mama Afika led Adis through the dense forest, her aged hands steady on her walking staff. Nena and Obinna walked closely behind, their eyes never leaving their daughter. Each step toward Yumadim felt heavier, as if the weight of the past was pressing down on them. Adis' heart pounded. The village she had never seen but had heard of in whispered stories was now within reach. She was not afraid, but she was uncertain. What would they think of her? Would they accept her? And most importantly, what would happen to the ones who had stolen her away from her family? As they approached the village outskirts, a group of children playing near the path spotted them first. One of them ran ahead, shouting, "Mama Afika has returned. And she has someone with her." Within moments, villagers gathered, their curiosity turning to shock as they saw the girl beside the old healer. Nena clutched Adis' hand tightly, her eyes scanning the crowd until she spotted Amara standing near the marketplace, her face frozen in fear. Mama Ajima, Adis' grandmother, had been sitting beneath the shade of a mango tree, but upon seeing Mama Afika, she shifted uncomfortably. Her wrinkled hands clenched the fabric of her wrapper, her mouth set in a firm line. The village chief, an elderly man draped in ceremonial robes, stepped forward, his piercing gaze sweeping over them. "Mama Afika," he said, his voice deep with authority. "What is the meaning of this?" Mama Afika exhaled slowly before speaking. "Many years ago, a terrible crime was committed in this village. A crime that tore a child from her mother's arms and left the family to suffer in anguish." A murmur spread through the crowd. Eyes darted between the healer, the girl, and Nena, who stood with silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "This child," Mama Afika continued, placing a firm hand on Adis' shoulder, "is the daughter of Nena and Obinna. She was stolen as a baby and left for dead in the forest." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Some covered their mouths in shock, while others turned questioning eyes to Amara and Mama Ajima, who now looked as if the ground beneath them had become unsteady. Obinna stepped forward, his voice trembling with rage. "Who did this?" Mama Afika's sharp gaze locked onto Amara and Mama Ajima. "You already know the answer." Silence fell over the village square. All eyes turned to the two women. Amara opened her mouth, but no words came out. Mama Ajima, usually so confident and commanding, seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. One of the elders, his expression dark, turned to them. "Is this true?" Amara swallowed hard. "I." Nena's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You stole my child," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You left her to die. And for what? Greed? Jealousy?" Amara's face twisted. "I only did what I thought was right," she snapped. "Obinna took me as his wife, but you," she turned to Nena, eyes blazing. "You were always in the way. And that child, she was never meant to inherit what should belong to my own children." A shocked cry came from the villagers. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others muttered curses under their breath. Obinna's hands clenched into fists. "You were my wife," he said through gritted teeth. "I trusted you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Mama Ejima finally spoke, her voice quivering. "She convinced me, Obinna. She made me believe that Adiz would be a curse upon our family, that the gods had destined her to bring misfortune." Mama Afika let out a bitter laugh. "The only curse here is the wickedness in your hearts." The chief raised a hand, silencing the growing murmurs of the crowd. His face was grave. "The gods do not take kindly to such betrayal," he said. "The theft of a child, the deception of a husband, and the suffering of a mother, these are crimes against not just this family, but against the village itself." The village elders gathered to discuss, their voices hushed but urgent. The crowd waited anxiously. Then, the chief turned back to the accused. "Amara and Mama Ejima, you will no longer be welcome in Umadim. From this day forward, you are banished. You may take nothing with you but the clothes on your backs. Should you be seen within these borders again, the gods will decide your fate." A stunned silence followed his words. Amara's face contorted in horror. "You cannot do this. Where will I go?" Mama Ejima fell to her knees, her face ashen. "Please, have mercy." But the chief's voice was firm. "You showed no mercy to a helpless child." The villagers stepped forward, their faces set with anger and disappointment. Some spat at Amara's feet. Others shook their heads and turned away, as if she no longer existed. Seeing no way out, Amara let out a frustrated scream before turning and running toward the forest, her mother-in-law stumbling behind her. As they disappeared beyond the trees, an eerie silence settled over the village. Obinna turned to Adiz, his eyes filled with emotion. "My daughter, can you ever forgive us?" Adiz met his gaze, her heart heavy but steady. "I have lived my life in the forest, but I have never been alone. The gods protected me. And now, I choose to walk forward, not backward." Nena clutched her daughter's hands, her heart swelling with pride. "You are strong, my Adiz." Mama Afika smiled knowingly. Strength was always her destiny. The villagers gathered around, whispering blessings for Adiz's return. Drummers began to play, and women sang songs of joy. Justice had been served, and the village of Umadim had learned a valuable lesson, that evil may plot in the shadows, but the gods are always watching. And fate never forgets. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the village square. The air was thick with tension as the elders conferred in hushed tones, their expressions grave. The villagers watched in silent anticipation, waiting for the final judgment to be passed upon Amara and Mama Ejima. Obinna stood beside Nena, his hands clenched into fists. Though justice had been served, his heart still burned with betrayal. The woman he had trusted, the mother who had raised him, had plotted against his own flesh and blood. He stole a glance at Adiz, who stood tall despite the weight of the moment. Her resilience was a testament to the strength that had carried her through the years of separation. After what felt like an eternity, the village chief stepped forward. His eyes settled on Amara and Mama Ejima, who remained on their knees before the gathering. Their faces were streaked with dust and sweat, their fear evident in the way their shoulders trembled. "The gods have witnessed your deeds," the chief intoned. "You have stolen, deceived, and betrayed. Such crimes demand severe punishment." A murmur rippled through the crowd, many nodding in agreement. The chief continued, "By the laws of Umidum, exile is the price for such treachery. You will be cast out, left to fend for yourselves beyond the protection of this village. But the gods are watching, and perhaps they may yet determine a harsher fate for you." Amara let out a strangled sob, her hands clutching at the earth beneath her. Mama Ajima turned pleading eyes toward Obinna. "My son, I raised you. I cared for you. Will you truly allow them to send me away with nothing?" Obinna's jaw tightened. "You raised me, but you betrayed my wife and my daughter. What mercy did you show them?" Tears welled in the old woman's eyes, but she had no answer. Amara, ever the cunning one, turned to Nena instead. "Sister, please, I was blinded by jealousy. I have wronged you, yes, but does my child deserve to suffer for my sins? Show mercy, I beg of you." Nena inhaled sharply, her heart warring with her pain. She had suffered, yes. She had wept for years, believing her child was lost forever. But she had also been taught that vengeance did not heal wounds, only time and grace could. She turned to the chief. "Let the gods decide." Gasps echoed through the crowd. Even Obinna turned to her in surprise. "The gods," the chief repeated, his brow furrowing. "Yes," Nena said firmly. "We are mortals. We pass judgment with flawed hearts, but the gods see all. If it is their will that Amara and Mama Ajima suffer, then so be it. But if there is another fate meant for them, let the gods reveal it." The village elders exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. The chief raised his staff. "So be it." A hush fell over the village as the decision was accepted. Amara and Mama Ajima were to be cast out with nothing, left to wander the wilderness. Their fates were no longer in the hands of men but in the hands of forces beyond them. With no more words to be said, the villagers parted, forming a path leading out of Umidum. Amara and Mama Ajima were given no farewell, no parting gifts, only the silence of those they had wronged. As the two women walked away, their shoulders hunched under the weight of shame, Adise watched them go with an unreadable expression. She felt no triumph, no joy in their suffering. She had learned to endure pain, to grow beyond hatred. She turned to Nena and Obinna, her true family. "You have found your way home," Obinna murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "And now, we must make up for the years we have lost." Nena cupped Adise's face, her touch gentle. "The gods spared you for a reason. Your destiny is greater than what was stolen from you." Adise, feeling the warmth of her mother's hands, nodded. She had been raised in the depths of the forest, nurtured by wisdom and survival. But now, she stood at the threshold of a new life. She took a deep breath, the scent of home filling her lungs. Her true journey was only beginning. As the first light of dawn bathed the village in a golden glow, a quiet realization spread among the people of Umidum: the old healer, Mama Afika, was gone. No one had seen her leave, nor had anyone heard her footsteps in the night. Her hut by the edge of the forest stood empty, save for a single wooden staff leaning against the doorway, a silent marker of her departure. The whispers began almost immediately. Where could she have gone? Perhaps the gods called her back. She was never truly one of us, was she? The villagers spoke of Mama Afika with both reverence and unease. Some believed she had been a messenger of the gods, sent to correct the wrongs of the past. Others feared that she had been something more, something beyond their understanding. But one thing was certain: she had always been watching. Many who lived near the forest claimed they had seen her shadow flickering in the moonlight long before the truth of Adise's kidnapping was revealed. There were stories of strange footprints appearing near the village square on nights when no one had ventured out, and of the way the wind carried whispers whenever justice was needed. She knew everything, an elder muttered one evening as the villagers gathered to recount the tale. She was watching, waiting, ensuring justice was done. The legend of the Watcher in the Shadows was born. But as the villagers speculated, Adise remained silent. She alone understood. She had known Mama Afika not as a figure of mystery but as a woman of wisdom and strength. A woman who had saved her when she was just a helpless child, who had taught her that fate was not cruel but patient. A woman who had not needed to stay in the village because her purpose had already been fulfilled. Standing beneath the vast sky, Adise felt the wind whisper through the trees, carrying a sense of peace she had never known before. The past could not be undone, but it had led her here, to her family, to her home, and to the truth. Years passed, and Adise grew into a woman of wisdom, just as Mama Afika had once been. She carried the lessons of fate and justice deep within her heart, never allowing anger or vengeance to cloud her judgment. And though the healer had vanished, Adise sometimes felt a presence in the wind, in the rustling leaves, in the quiet moments between breaths. Perhaps Mama Afika was still watching. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the edge of the village, in the depths of the forest, the watcher in the shadows remained, ensuring that fate would always find its way. And that justice would never be forgotten. And fate, as always, had already chosen her path.